you give us in the gift of children and the opportunities that we have as parents to raise children that love you. We thank you, Father, for that enormous responsibility, enormous privilege, and we thank you for the assurance that ultimately it's your job and not ours, and nothing that we do will determine where our children end up spiritually. You alone determine these things. But Father, we thank you for the joy of being parents and of enjoying our children and seeing their growth and seeing their development and knowing that all of it is your providence at work, giving us children that are born for maturity. We ask that you would encourage us tonight as we consider more on this topic with little ones and give us wisdom and insight from yourself, Father, that will help us to understand the issues that we face with infants and also the issues that others might face that we might encounter from time to time who need that word of encouragement. We ask these things in Christ's name. Amen. We'll go 0 to 2. Do you want one for Richard?
Yep.
Understanding human development within the lifespan is important if we are to understand people both in general and as individuals. Such study enables the counsellor to identify the unusual or abnormal experiences of their clients, in this case children. It further enables understanding of the development lags and parenting problems contributing to the client's issues. By client there I'm referring to children who might come to you for counselling. You can counsel children as young as 1-year-old, 2-year-old. Next week we're going to talk about how you do that, using play therapy and drawing techniques. Now, just in life experience, we learn lots about, life experience as parents, we learn a lot about children. And our own experience comes up against children. Parents are the bones that children sharpen their teeth on. So there's always this backwards and forwards between a parent and a child, a kind of each moving against the other, each moving with the other, each seeking to try out on the other person their own issues, work out their own issues in relationship with the other. And so the child and his relationship with the parents, primarily with the mother at this age, is always contending with the mother or cooperating with the mother. As the child learns to cooperate and contends against and cooperates with, so the child is learning about life and relationship. The mother also is contending or cooperating with the child. Now, as the mother is dealing with the child, and this applies to the father as well, their own issues often surface. Issues which perhaps were there latent for a long time and come to the surface with children. And sometimes, particularly with the first child, it can come as a little shock. Bit of a shock to realise you're not as patient as you thought you were, and that you thought you dealt with your anger problems back when you were 14, and suddenly they're there again. And some parents will even confess to having thoughts of physically harming the children they love dearly out of their frustration and their tiredness, their fatigue, and their exhaustion. So there's this dynamic going on all the time. Now, part of that dynamic is your life experience. But the value of doing a study like this is that we are gathering together the experiences of many people, hundreds of people really, and people that have observed hundreds of people in this life experience, and there's a commonality that comes together that's true for 0 to 2, both for parents and for children. So in other words, the more that we can understand about ourselves, the individual, the more that we can understand about people in general at this life stage, the more equipped we're going to be able to understand and help and encourage people caught up in this, both parent and child. If we're to step into their world and step into their hearts and step into their lives, it's good to have some idea ahead of time of what we're stepping into, so we're not going in blind. A study like this can really help us. Help us know what to look out for, what to expect. So what we're going to do, as we go through each of these stages of infancy and childhood, we're going to go back to this diagram here, and we're going to follow it down through each of the life stages. So, for instance, we're 0 to 2, so we're zipping across here tonight, and next week we'll go drop down one and zip across, and so on. So please have this in front of you over the next few weeks. Now, last week we began to look at Freud and Erikson. So if you're going across the top there, birth to 18 months, Freud, Erikson, and we're going to look at tonight Piaget and Kohlberg, and you'll notice that Kohlberg's square is empty. So you think, oh, well, there's not much to say about Kohlberg till we get down a little bit. Well, that in itself is very instructive. So let's look at Jean Piaget's theory of cognitive development. Well, just before we do that, let me just hand this out. Now, this is from the New Zealand Herald back in February 2010. I think that might, yes. I keep going the wrong way around, don't I? You need to sit up this end so the camera can catch you. Here we go. Do I have a copy of... Here we go. Now, here is an absolutely outstanding example of how thinking of people in terms of this produces the concerns in this article. The critical first 9 months. The findings of a study that promises to send alarm bells ringing on the heads of parents everywhere has been released in Britain this week. The Millennium Cohort study of 15,000 children. 15,000 children. So this is your experience with your child multiplied 15,000 times. Has shown that the progress of babies at the age of 9 months in the area of motor skills is directly related to how cognitively developed they will be at the age of 5. Now, we're doing Piaget's cognitive development, and here's a study taken released just a couple of years ago, 15,000 children, shows that motor skills that develop here, according to the study, will tell you how smart the kids are at 5 years of age. You see, that's exactly lifespan development theory being put into practice, and the results being made public, and the results determining government policy and the allocation of scarce resources in economic theory. Delays happen in the development of roughly 1 in every 10 children. So that means that delays here, in roughly 1 in 10 children, there's delays here noted in their motor skill development, delays which will have an impact 5 years of age. 5 is about when they start school, right? So hence the importance of what's their cognitive development like when they hit school age. This will be a concern for some parents because in essence it appears to go against the prevailing orthodoxy that all children develop at their own pace, and that the pace of reaching certain milestones doesn't necessarily have anything much to do with intelligence. So what they're doing is they're putting physical development and cognitive development on the same graph. And they're saying, let's map physical development, let's map cognitive development, and see if there's a correlation. The Guardian puts the new finding starkly. Children who failed at 9 months to reach 4 key milestones in gross motor development relating to sitting, unaided, crawling, standing and taking their first walking steps were found to be 5 points behind on average in cognitive ability tests taken at age 5 compared to those who passed the milestones. Now, you see what this kind of stuff does? Suddenly, Happy families become distraught families. Parents are thrown into panic. Well, it's good to read about these things and think about them. This equates to the difference between being in the middle of the ability range in cognitive tests and being below average. The report said, this finding highlights the importance of early screening for development delay at ages under 1 year as a tool to promote positive child development. See, what do you think of that? Highlights the importance of early screening for development delay. In other words, we need to get to our 0 to 2s and do some screening so that we can find out where the delays are here, so that we can put in corrective measures to ensure at age 5 they're not cognitively falling behind. So, given that research, what does the government do? It pours millions into early childhood education. And we suddenly have preschools springing up all over the country for this very reason. So that we can catch the children early before age 5. Age 5's too late. Age 5, they start school. It's too late. It's too late to catch their cognitive development. We've got to start right back here. According to this, 15,000 babies in Britain, British babies aren't that much different from New Zealand babies. You see? Hence, early childhood education. Early screening for developmental delays at ages under 1 year. Now, some critics have pointed out there are some holes that can be punched in this study. All children are different, and there's no reason to brand them failures because of perceived slow development at the age of 9 months. Everyone knows of children who have been extremely slow to meet gross motor targets and yet are now finishing PhDs. In other words, there's some saying, look, in spite of the 15,000 children that were studied, we can't naturally assume that there's a correlation between physical development and cognitive development. How much do genes play in this equation? The findings could be used to get the government intervening at even lower ages to ensure better educational outcomes, which could be a good or bad thing depending on how you view it. Should the government be in the business of equalising outcomes, especially if a large component of the difference between children is genetic in origin and cannot be changed either way? And if they're all going to catch up eventually, then what's the point in pouring millions and millions into early childhood education? See, that's what the critics are saying. Just like in Britain and New Zealand, the issue of the tale of academic non-achievers has become the big news and political fodder. There is a tale of underachieving Kiwi kids which persists despite a concerted outlay of time and money to address it. Based on studies like this one, is it a realistic goal to be trying to iron out wide variations in academic achievements within our kids? If it's not realistic, why do we persist with it? And if it is still a fervently held wish by educators and society in general, at what stage along the development spectrum do we need to start investing resources to ensure better outcomes? Where should our resources be directed? Should they be directed here, 0 to 2? Should they be directed at 5? Should they be directed at high school? Should they be directed at university level? Now, age stage development has pushed that answer back and back and back and back and back. University's too late. High school's too late. Intermediate's too late. 5-year-old is too late. So it gets pushed back and back and back, and now it's early childhood. But you know, it's going to go right back to conception, and we're going to be talking about the things you can do in conception to promote and stimulate cognitive development. And you know how that works. So the pregnant mother is encouraged to read books to her unborn child, encouraged to put on music for the child to listen to, things designed to stimulate the child's sensory understandings and responses and cognitive development. If the findings of the Millennium Cohort Study to be believed, earlier, much earlier than ever before, has to be the answer. Okay, so this stuff's coming out all the time. It's determining government policies. It's actually creating grief and concern and anxiety in the lives of many parents. So you might have a parent who comes to you with a 18-month, 2-year-old child and says to you, I'm very concerned because my child is below his milestones for the average, and I'm concerned that he's going to end up being on unemployment for the rest of his life if he doesn't learn to walk very soon. See how that goes? So learning to walk now is related to whether or not he can hold down a job. What's your response to that, to a survey like this? As Christians, how should we deal with something like this?
It was interesting in Berger, there's examples of the kids that had been neglected in some ways in infancy and were missing out. Like, there was one who was underweight and it was actually affecting a whole lot of parts of their lives. And it was her mother had gone to work, and the kid was finding it difficult adjusting with those who had been caring for it. It sort of was all over the place and it wasn't really having someone.
So a child that experienced deficits in the kind of care it was receiving.
Yes, and it actually had been affected.
Yes, down the track, all these areas, physical, cognitive, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think what this study is saying, that children who don't experience those deficits, but have differences in the way they develop, will have cognitive effects downstream. So certainly we should address any deficits that are there in place. So if you're talking to someone, you'd ask questions about the childcare. But what are we going to do with the fact that that God is sovereign, God's providence is in play, children are created in the image of God, and we are to delight in them and rejoice in them and encourage them. And what should we do as we look down the late stage, down in the corridor of history of the child's development?
Well, we should be more interested in the child's heart than just their intellectual ability. I mean, that's important, but we work, well, I think in the West, in New Zealand, we worship education. Education is becoming a bigger and bigger idol. It's the answer to everything, but it really isn't. Because you take those kids and take them away from home and put them in a place at preschool, whatever, where they get physically more stimulated and all that, but then they lose out on maybe the emotional actual connection that they have at home with one person. So it swings and roundabouts, kind of.
Okay, so it's so definitely there is a focus here on the intellectual development of the child,
the spiritual's not coming into this.
or even moral. You see, the assumption seems to be that if our children can all excel educationally, then we'll have a better society.
There seems to be opposing opinions within these theories. From what I've heard, I asked someone who recently studied early in childhood education and asked them what was currently being taught as the prevailing theories, and they said currently there's a lot of skepticism to these milestone theories, and there's a real emphasis on treating everyone as an individual and almost ignoring those milestones they have to achieve this type of attitude. So that's what's currently being taught from early childhood education.
Right, and you can see how that could work back here, you know, treating the child as an individual, but then at 5 years old the child enters into the school, say the public school system, where some of that individualism is lost and is curbed, and he has to become part of a system in order to succeed.
All the way through, they're trying to get rid of standards so that they don't have to.
Well, if we can just try and keep the discussion at a theoretical level rather than, you know, the problems with New Zealand's government. Because remember here, we're trying to understand how to help people who are struggling in these areas. So a child who needs, for instance, at 5 and 6 needs remedial reading, needs to be in a class for children with remedial reading, does that mean that back here we should have picked up on that sooner because there's evidence back here in their physical development? What does that say? What does it say about the child? And what does it say about how the parent is going to respond to that reality? Well, that brings us to Piaget's theory of cognitive development. Piaget was concerned to understand how the infant and child developed in their ability to know things. Remember that Freud was interested in the inner drives and Erikson in social relations, while Piaget was interested in cognitive development, that's intellectual development, and Kohlberg in moral development, which we'll talk about in a minute. So Piaget's ideas have profoundly impacted on the way we educate infants and children. Piaget developed a dynamic model of the mind with active exploration seen as the basis for learning, understanding, and discovery. In other words, he didn't see the mind of a child as static, like an empty container, a static empty container just sitting there on the table waiting to be filled, which he claimed was the traditional way of educating a child. You just fill them up with knowledge. He saw rather as a dynamic model where the child learns through active exploration. In other words, the container jumps off the table and starts crawling around doing things, as a basis for learning, understanding, and discovery. He observed that infants learned for themselves as they explored and experienced their world. Well, you know, at 2 years of age, 18 months, you have to put a leash on the child when you go to the supermarket. Otherwise, they'll run away from you. Explore their world. Well, Piaget saw that, and he said, well, this is how the child's developing cognitively. He observed infants learning for themselves as they explored and experienced their world. He saw this dynamic as the key to cognitive development in childhood. In other words, he's saying if you restrict that, you will restrict their cognitive development. Furthermore, he saw that if learning was missed out in one stage, then that stage would have to be returned to before progress could be made to the next stage. Hence, repeating a class in school, remedial reading programs, adult education, etc. It's all based on the assumption that as you travel down here, and you go into childhood to adolescence, and then young adult, okay, and then middle adult. You see, if here there is for instance, you get to middle adult and you can't read, this seems so obvious to us, doesn't it? That if you can't read, you've got to learn to read. And you learn to read not by picking up, say, a book that a literate person at this stage of life might read, but you'd have to begin to reading by reading the ABCs, Janet and John. In other words, you have to go all the way back here. So if you've missed out, you have to go back and redress and redo. Now, see, that seems to be obvious in reading and cognitive development, but you see, these guys are all saying for the social and for the moral, it's all a matter of going back and fixing up the what was not done properly back here. For instance, if your church has a ministry to children who come from the kind of homes that Mark was talking about, where there's significant deprivation socially, particularly socially, and those children come into your church, you will notice immediately the difference between those children's ability to socialise and children of the same age who have grown up in the church with church parents who have where the deficits haven't been as great in the home, and the children have grown up, and at that physical level there's a much higher level of maturity and ability to socialise. Now, this theory says that those children will have to go back and be taught the lessons that they missed out on at the beginning. In other words, you can't expect them to make the adjustment here on what they've missed out on. You have to take them back and begin to teach them again, as if they were very small children. So for Piaget, the key to cognitive development was the child's ability to dynamically explore their world. And if for some reason they missed out on that here, then it's going to affect their cognitive development. And so then as a young adult or middle adult or an adolescent, if the child is in a remedial educational program, that program has to give them the experience of a dynamic experience of learning, which they missed out on back here. In other words, you can't put them in a classroom like this, like we're doing here. Piaget would be horrified if he came in here and saw this. You can't put them in a classroom like this and just fill their little heads with knowledge. As adolescents or young adults, you have to take them back. And so now, if you read anything on the theories of teaching adults, adult educational theories, it's all about interactive and life experience and getting out of the classroom and hands-on and Piaget. Piaget identified the stages of learning within a mental schema that included at each stage physical growth, experience with objects in the environment, social interaction, and finally an equilibrium which brings the first three together to build cognitive stability and coherence. So at 0 to 2, in that dynamic learning environment that you're providing for your 0 to 2-year-old, you see within that there is physical growth, which you can't provide for. That'll just happen. God's provided for that. Experience with objects in the environment. So you have to give the child objects with which to experience their life. So, you construct a mobile for the child while he's in the cots because they need to look at. See, that's experience with objects in the environment. You provide toys for them. Children who never have any toys to play with experience cognitive retardation in their development. And social interaction. So you just won't give the child a toy and then leave the room. You'll stay there and interact with them over the toy, over the mobile, or over the colours. You see, and Piaget would say physical growth matched with experience with objects in the environment and social interaction. Well, if all that's done, the way it's the extent that ought to be done, then they'll come together to build cognitive stability and coherence. And that this equilibrium must be experienced at each stage of the lifespan, and if any lifespan that equilibrium is not experienced, they have to go back and rediscover that, or discover what the equilibrium they never had back here. So for instance, you working with young adults, you take them back to experience the childhood or adolescent adventures that they missed out on. So you take them abseiling, and rock climbing and those kinds of things. Things they missed out on. Piaget's work observed that cognitive understanding in children is a process, hence children do not understand as adults do. Piaget's discernible stages in cognitive development. Now you've got them there on this diagram here. Sensomotor, pre-operation, concrete and formal. And so tonight we're just looking at up to age 2, so it's the sensomotor. The sensomotor stage, here the child learns through a feeling, action, response to the external environment. Their senses are actively at work, hence sensomotor. At this stage we see the beginning of object permanence. The child's ability to know an object still exists even when they do not see it or touch it. Have you experienced that in your children? That at that young age, they know an object exists even when they do not see it or touch it? A child goes to bed and their favourite teddy bear is not there and they start to cry. Now the teddy bear's nowhere in the room. You go out and you find the teddy in the laundry where you've tried to scrub it clean and you bring it back and you give it to the child and the child immediately settles down and goes to sleep. That's object permanence. They know the object exists even though they can't see it or touch it. That's cognitive development. And if the child can remember that, then it's an indication that as his cognitive development proceeds, he'll remember other things. He'll remember that 2 + 2 = 4 and so on down the track. Okay, well, we'll pick up Piaget next week on the next age stage, but what are your thoughts about Piaget and what he had to say about how little ones learn?
helpful in the traditional type education system. If you imagine that there's a lot of people who miss out. Like my grandfather, he was whipped every time he failed because he wasn't particularly intelligent, and so it was basically rote learning for the entire time he was at school, and he had to go home and do his homework, and he got the strap if he didn't learn it properly. So he gave up trying, and he just got whipped for not doing it. I mean, that was the education system. Whereas Piaget would help to try and engage with someone like that and give him something he was interested in doing. He grew up and became a farmer, so going out and putting water on the flowers would be probably a helpful activity for some people. So I think there's certainly some positive aspects.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we see on Tanzania all the schools are just, and they're huge classrooms and that, but it's all just chalk on the blackboard and all just cramming your heads rote and all that rote learning stuff, questions, answers, and you can't. They even teach because they want kids to pass, because they still have the exams at the end of the year you got to pass. So the idea is just get them passed. That's success. So it's all. Well, these are the questions that that might be in the exam, and you've got to learn the answer off by heart, basically. So if you're good at that, you do well, and if you're not so good at that, but you're good at like the hands-on stuff, you don't do too well.
Okay, well, Piaget would call that pre-operation and concrete. What about with the infants then, sensomotor, which what we've been talking about here? With your experience with your own children at this stage of infancy, what have you observed as to how they learn? Let's see, what have we got? 9 months, 2 years, 14 months.
This isn't a direct answer to what you just asked, but what he says, it makes me wonder. A lot of heroes and great people in the past, brilliant thinkers and made discoveries, and you read their biographies, and so many of them deprived as children, George Carter or Amy Carmichael, and that was people that grew up in such, they definitely didn't have tons of toys to interact with and stuff, and yet they, had really brilliant, made huge discoveries and stuff.
So how do you account for that, Eden?
I don't know.
And yet we know that if a child doesn't have a dynamic environment which attracts his or her interest and curiosity, that they are deprived.
But I've seen with Zeke, he enjoys, I think he does learn faster when you're there helping him do things, like, because he sees you do it and he does it. If you just give him any bunch of blocks or whatever and walk out the room, he doesn't know what to do.
Okay.
So he's copying and
Okay.
processing all that. Just the fun, it's actually more fun to do it with someone. It's like that all the way through life. It's more fun to do things together. It seems to be that way with him.
Okay, so if you didn't play with the blocks with him, he might think the blocks were for throwing at people or something. You're teaching him that they're there
Or
to be.
when you poke him, he knows they're for throwing.
Okay, so what do you think about Piaget's theories?
I think some of them are good observations of a human, but to try and narrow it down to one part of a life cycle is a bit pushing it a bit. I think as humans, we are active in exploration in different ways. Different people explore different things, and we enjoy interacting in different ways to our environments. And some people you can see in adults or in different ages you can see that, but certainly, but even that those scientists which Eden was mentioning, I mean, they were certainly showing they had a discovering and an exploration desire at an older age. So it still was possible.
Right. So maybe we can say that Piaget's theory seemed to work quite well at this level, when not a lot of formal learning is expected of an infant. And in other words, for an infant to be engaged with play would seem to be quite appropriate at this stage. And I know when Tony Bracefield was building his preschool, one of the conditions he had to have that was required by the government was that the inside and the outside play area had to be freely available to the child without any obstacle or impediment. Like there had to be no step down to the play area outside. It had to be level so the child could see it and go out there if the child wished, or come back if the child wished. So the maximum freedom to move within his environment. Now that seems to work okay here. The issue for Piaget's theories, though, what happens later on in childhood with Piaget, and we'll get to that eventually. Okay, well now let's talk about Kohlberg's theory of moral development. So Freud was inner drives, Erikson was social, Piaget was cognitive, Kohlberg is moral. Kohlberg's theory of moral development. Kohlberg was interested to know how children developed an understanding of moral choice. Like Piaget, he believed that moral development required growth at each stage before development was possible to the next stage. Epigenetic is the term that's given to that. That if the child is to have a certain moral understanding at this stage, then that moral understanding had to be in place at this stage and at this stage. In other words, if no moral development took place here or here, then you can't expect them here to have a moral awareness or understanding. Kohlberg saw 3 levels or platforms of moral development to be reached in the lifespan, with 2 stages at each level. On this diagram here, you'll see that there's Kohlberg's 3 levels, and there were 2 stages with each level. Now, I've actually got another diagram which shows that a little more clearly. Kohlberg's theory of moral development. Now, you'll notice that for Kohlberg, moral development began at age 3. Hence, just looking at that diagram, pre-conventional morality was the first stage, or the first level. Yes, we'll keep the level 1, pre-conventional morality, level 2, conventional morality. Now, for Kohlberg, conventional morality was when we learn to conform to the moral conventions of our society. We've learnt to conform and we're in harmony with them. Level 3 is when we develop a moral conscience and stance of our own, which is not determined or constrained necessarily by society's constraints. We have a maturity, we have a morally that we take a personal commitment to ourselves to live as moral people, not because society requires it, but within ourselves. We find within ourselves the personal principles or the contractual arrangement. Now, he would call that post-conventional morality. It moves beyond the convention that society imposes. Okay, that's level 3, level 2. Level 1 then, pre-conventional morality. Here is where we are training our children to conform morally to the standards of family, church and society. We're moving them towards conventional morality. And if we can get our children to level 2 successfully, then they'll be good moral citizens, right? Conforming to the constraints of our society, our moral constraints. So that's kind of how it goes. And there's his ages there and how that corresponds. And, you see the teenage there. Conventional morality and social order, it's a challenge. Coming back to level 1, We'll talk in a minute about the fact he only starts at age 3. But level 1, pre-conventional morality. At this stage, the child is trying to keep the rules and understand right and wrong as defined by authority figures. Now let's see, we have a 3-year-old here and a 5-year-old here and a 7-year-old here. So according to Kohlberg, they're all still at pre-conventional morality. 3-year-old, the 5-year-old, the 7-year-old. At this stage, the child is trying to keep the rules and understand right and wrong as defined by authority figures. They have not developed their own convention of morality, hence it's pre-conventional. Their moral behaviour at this stage is guided by consequences. The age range is somewhat arbitrary in Kohlberg's scheme, since moral development is harder to pinpoint than, say, cognitive or social development. Remember, all these theories are based on observation. Now, if you're observing a room full of infants 0 to 2, Kohlberg would say it's a lot easier to observe cognitive development and social development, but much harder to perceive moral development. Now, I don't know if you agree with him or not. Do you see moral development in your infants? Hold that thought. Kohlberg saw no moral development before age 3. Now, the reason for that is not because he thought that 0 to 3 were amoral, but rather that the way he went about testing for morality only worked with older children. So stage 1 of level 1 is punishment orientated, where children obey in order to avoid punishment. In other words, he would say that ages 3 to 4, children don't obey out of a desire to be good. They obey simply to avoid punishment. Now, you see, this is based on his observations, remember. And he can't see the heart of a child. All he can see is the child's behaviour. So he draws conclusions about the child from the child's behaviour. Well, it's pretty dangerous to do, isn't it? Because ultimately, we can only draw conclusions about a child from knowing the child's heart. But because he can't see the heart, he had no access to the heart, he had no way of understanding the heart issues. Based on behaviour, he could say, oh, well, that child's doing that because he knows if he doesn't, he'll get into trouble. End of story. There was no room there for that child's doing that because in his heart he desires to do good. Hence, punishment orientated. Stage 2 at this level is for ages 5 to 6, where children obey in order to satisfy needs. 5 to 6, that's the first year of school, hedonistically orientated. This is where the jelly bean theory comes in. So in primary school, age 5, age 6, the teacher has a big jar of jelly beans on the table. Now, you know, she knows that she can't use a punishment-orientated way of getting her children to learn. It's not allowed to hit them. So she uses a hedonistically orientated way of getting them to learn. Okay, if you get your sums done before the bell goes, you'll get 3 jelly beans and you can choose your own colour from out of here. You see? That's the child obeying in order to satisfy needs. Now, do you do that with your kids? You don't have to answer that if you don't want to. Do you do that with your kids?
Potty training.
You did with potty training? Did it work?
Yeah, it did.
Rather than holding on, they let go,
Yeah, that's right.
as we talked about last week. No, it all gets better after potty training until they get to teenagers. Yes. Kohlberg gained his data by asking children to respond to stories. This is how Kohlberg assessed moral development with children. He would ask them stories, he'd tell them stories and ask them to respond to his stories. For children younger than 3 years of age, the data was harder to obtain. Hence, before 3 years of age, there's no moral development. You see, it's just, you drive a truck through these things. But they are interesting in themselves. So from 3 years of age upwards, he could sit the children down and tell them a story. Then he'd ask them questions about the story, and from their responses, he would establish this classification. Before 3 years of age, when they're just, 0 to 2, they're just too busy crawling around, Piaget, crawling around exploring their environment to sit still long enough to hear a story and respond to it. So you say, oh, well, no moral development. In other words, what my net doesn't catch is not fish. Well, his Heinz story is one of his most famous. A woman was near death from a special kind of cancer. There was one drug that the doctors thought might save her. It was a form of radium that a pharmacist in the same town had recently discovered. The drug was expensive to make, but the pharmacist was charging 10 times what the drug cost him to make. He paid $200 for the radium and charged $2,000 for a small dose of the drug. The sick woman's husband, Heinz, went to everyone he knew to borrow the money, but he could only get together about $1,000, which is about half of what it cost. He told the pharmacist that his wife was dying and asked him to sell it cheaper or let him pay later. But the pharmacist said, no, I discovered the drug and I'm going to make money from it. So Heinz got desperate and broke into the pharmacist's store to steal the drug for his wife. Should Heinz have done that? That's the moral story. Should Heinz have done that? Now, Kohlberg was not really that interested in whether the child's answer to the story was yes or no. He was more concerned with rather the reasoning that went on for them as they came to that answer. So the child might say yes or the child might say no, and then Heinz would ask further questions about how the child arrived at that understanding. And as he did that, and from the child's explanation of why they came to their yes or no, Kohlberg would learn a lot about the kind of home that child grew up in, and what kind of things were motivating the child's moral development. So the reasoning process changed or developed as the age increased, and these changes of development he called stages. Kohlberg left, okay, let me just stop there, and bearing in mind that before the age of 3 there's no moral development. What do you think about that? What do you think about that? Before the age of 3 there's no moral development.
Rubbish. Rubbish, I mean...
So what do you, in your 0 to 3 or 0 to 2, what moral development do you expect to see in your children?
I expect them to become sort of caring. I mean, I don't know what I expect to see really. I'm thought about it, but no.
One to respect authority.
Okay. Okay. What are you looking for morally in your infant child?
Well, they start to get an idea that there's a right behaviour and wrong behaviour. Or, there's a right and wrong thing.
Punishment orientated?
No, not really.
Okay. But they would just learn within themselves that there is a right and wrong. Would you expect children at this age to know they'd done wrong by pulling his little sister's hair and be able to be taught to be sorrowful and to apologise and say sorry?
Not so much.
That's the one that
2-year-old?
2-year-old. Yeah.
2.5-year-old?
Yeah, 1-year-old.
You know, they talk about the terrible twos. Is that true, or is that just an old wives' tale? Are the twos terrible?
I've heard a mother say with 5 kids that people talk about the terrible twos, but if you train them between 1 and 2, then she rarely had to discipline after 2, and her kids were not out of control at 2 because they knew to respect her before 2.
So she would say to Kohlberg, don't stop at 3, keep going back.
Mm-hmm.
Because 1 to 2, you can train for moral development.
Mm. And she said that everybody thinks, oh, they're so sweet and innocent, they don't know what they're doing, when they're 1. And then they hit 2 and they're out of control and you don't know how to contain them.
Okay.
Whereas she said, if you get them before that, they're actually really easy to control. All they need is, a little something in there set together.
Okay. Mark and Michelle, you both had experience with 2-year-olds? Are the terrible twos a reality? Everything's confidential here if you...
About 2-year-olds.
Pardon?
I think it depends on the child. I mean, I've had some, the first two were pretty simple at that age, and my current 2-year-old is an explorer, so he just is off. He doesn't care where I am or what I, say to him most of the time. He just wants to go.
It's gone.
And I think I've done anything different with him than the other two. It's just, I think it's a real time where he realises he's got the power to actually go do something where I can't physically stop him sometimes, He's not, he can walk,
Okay.
he can talk,
He can run.
help himself to food, all those sorts of things.
So would you expect him to leave home at an earlier age than the other two?
No.
Would you expect to see that independence kind of be maintained all the way through?
Possibly. I mean,
Wanting to be away?
not wanting to be away, but just maybe having more determination in some things.
Okay. Perhaps more determined than the other two?
Yeah, possibly.
Does that come from being the youngest of three?
Maybe, yeah.
Wants to make his mark?
Yeah.
Fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah.
Doesn't want to be under the shadow of his older brothers? Make his own mark? Who knows? The mystery that is child raising. Mark, you've got a 3-year-old. Any moral development in the first 3 years of his life?
Yes.
Well, you better explain that because Kohlberg says no.
Before I go, I mean, I'll probably say a lot about that, but I'm just quite curious to know even his definition of morality. Because I haven't seen this whole theory, but it seems to be saying that for these younger children, they don't even know what morality is, that it's depending on other people's morality. And
You mean-
when they get a bit older, then they're able to develop their own sense of morality, and whatever their sense of morality is the definition of morality.
So you're looking at this, are you? Is that what you... Oh, sorry, what is it you're commenting on? Something on the notes?
Just this the whole even word pre-conventional morality. Just I think you mentioned something about when you're explaining some of the different levels, how they're able to then to sort of discover their own sense of morality. Am I right in saying that?
Well, remember, it's all based on observation. So Kohlberg would look at people growing through life stages, and he would see teenagers through to young adults. He would see them conforming to society's norms morally. Now, you don't see that in a 2-year-old, generally speaking. They're just not aware. So he would see that group of teenage to young adults conforming to society's norms morally. And he would say, well, that's a conventional morality. It's a morality based on the conventions of society, church, home, whatever, culture, laws. Now, prior to that is a pre-conventional morality where they have to be trained, punishment-orientated or hedonistically orientated, to conform to the morality that's expected of their environment. A post-conventional morality goes beyond that, where a self-actualized adult is a moral person because within themselves they've found their own reasons for being moral, not dependent on. Now, they may still conform to society's conventions, but not because those conventions are in place, but because they themselves, within themselves, wish to be moral.
That's a big generalisation.
So, for instance, here's a 17-year-old boy who is finding hard to discipline himself to do a course of study, or discipline himself to hold down a job and do what he's told. And conventional morality requires him to do one of those things and many other things. And the counsellor would say to the concerned parent, look, just relax, within 10 years he'll be a respectable businessman just like his father. In other words, in 10 years he will have reached, or 15 years, a post-conventional moral position where he will find within himself the reasons to conform. Now, based on observation, you see that all the time. You see teenagers who are at a loss, really, to deal with their world in their 30s and their 40s, conforming quite well and performing very well and doing well in their jobs and so on.
One thing.
So, sorry, do you want to come back on that, Mark?
But just, yeah, I mean, it's still hard to his whole observing morality and what the Bible says is morality is
Chalk and cheese, isn't it?
quite different.
Light and dark. Yes.
Like, you can see the sin in a child from a very early age. When they don't get what they want, they let it known, and they could be as early as a couple of weeks old.
Now, what does a good Christian parent do with that sin when it surfaces?
I think for a younger child, if they're saying they're hungry and they are hungry,
Yes.
you feed them.
Yes.
So if they're just wanting them to be the centre of the world and to make the kingdom, then the centre of the world kingdom, then you in the best, in a nice manner, knowing that it's still young, you say we can't be. You can't get that.
Right.
And try and meet their needs as much as you can.
But
And when you can tell that they're not hungry and they're not.
But see, a non-Christian parent would do exactly the same thing. What is it is different about the way a Christian parent would or could or ought to deal with that? You know, everything you just said, but is there, as Christians, is there something else that we bring to bear on the child's heart, even at a young age?
Well, there's awareness of a God who's above us. It's not just us. We're also under authority, I guess. The problem I have with his is that morality seems to more go on how good you are at reasoning.
Well, it's all based on observation.
Yeah, but if a kid's more gifted with rational powers of reasoning, then he's saying they're more moral. But I've seen you can have, some of the most brilliant minds in the world are the most corrupt people.
So the problem is,
kids that are more stupid who make better moral choices.
so what we're up against here is a morality that takes no cognizance at all of the heart issues, or what the Bible calls the issues of sin, and of sanctification, and of heart change. Now, as his observations go, you may or may not decide they're largely accurate. The observations he's made do seem to fit a kind of a framework. There is a development there in moral awareness in terms of people's behaviour. But at the end of the day, if we want to see moral development in our children, we have to shepherd their hearts with the gospel, with gospel grace. A gospel grace that involves an acknowledgement of sin, acknowledgement of the need of forgiveness and change.
The proverb says, train up a child in the way you want it to go.
Now, the challenge is, the challenge for us as Christian parents is to know what's the appropriate way to apply the gospel to a child's heart at different points in the life stage. You see, the way you apply the gospel to a 2-year-old will be different from the way you apply it to a 12-year-old or a 22-year-old. And that's where we need wisdom and understanding. What does it mean to shepherd the heart of a 2-year-old, to shepherd the heart of an adolescent, to shepherd the heart of a 30-year-old? Now, as counsellors, you see, if you have people coming to you at these different life stages, and they're caught up in moral issues of some kind that need counselling, how are you going to apply the gospel to those hard issues? Now, you see, if you just apply the gospel the same way to everyone you meet, regardless of where they are in the life stage development, then you're going to be less successful than if you have some understanding of moral development in their hearts. What's an appropriate response for a 2-year-old to make to the gospel? What's an appropriate response for a 12-year-old to make to the gospel?
We're just going back to Kohlberg's observation of morality. When my son was 2, quite often he would do that reasoning thing. He would try and explain his action wasn't really wrong, and he would or try and in order to get what he wants, he would come up with.
Is that delightful?
New demands, and so Kohlberg might his conclusion might be that my son is starting to learn to be more moral, and that he's coming to terms with different rules and trying to make them his own. But from a Christian point of view, obviously he was just defying, in a very intelligent and clever way, he was defying the rules, and it was just rebellion.
Well, now remember, Kohlberg would say, unless he can tell this child the story of Heinz and have the child relate back to them their reasoning processes of how they got to their answer, he wasn't able to make a judgment about where they are in their moral development. So he would say of your child, very interesting, but there's nothing we can say about their moral development. They're just a blank. Hence those 2 top squares are empty. But you see, parents look at those 2 top squares and say, that's just not right. My child knows what's right and wrong from an early age. I've trained them. Okay, we're going to take a break now, and then when we come back, we'll look at the consequences, some of the consequences of Kohlberg's insistence that there's no moral development before age 3. Inner drives, social development, cognitive development, and moral development of our 4 theorists. And of the 4 of them, moral development is the only one that says nothing happens until the age 3. These ones are all saying something happens in the 0 to 2. But however, whatever happens in the 0 to 2 is something which is a precursor to what happens later on. In other words, they're committed to the theory of development in all these areas. Now we could add there, while there hasn't been, we'll add here physical development, but there's no theories about physical development because it's just all pretty obvious. What is there to theorise about? People grow up. Now, with these in mind, this guy, based on these theories, this guy has come up with this, what my child can't do yet. Now, I'll be interested to know what you think about this. As you look down that list, you find there's examples there of all of those 5 categories. What my child can't do yet. Now, obviously, at 0 to 2, physical development, the child can't lift heavy weights. That's pretty obvious. But there are other things that the child can't do. When working with children, keep in mind what they're ready for and what they are not, what they can do and what they are unable to do yet. And so this is the child talking to the parent. I can't share. Children use possession of objects as a device to understand autonomy. Just as babbling comes before talking, so owning comes before sharing. To share fully, a child must first fully possess. Now, this is moral development, okay? This one's moral development. And here we're saying, don't expect a child to be able to share until they've reached a certain stage where they're willing to give up what they possess and share it with another. In other words, the child has to go through a stage, an elementary stage, where they possess without sharing. Therefore, don't expect me to share, the child is saying. I can't say I'm sorry and I mean it. Saying I'm sorry has little meaning to the young child. To say I'm sorry and understand what you're saying, you must also be able to understand how the other person feels. Again, moral development. Piaget said Kohlberg says nothing happened before the age of 3 in moral development. So the way that plays itself out is, I can't say I'm sorry because I can't really understand how another person feels. Now, people learn PhDs coming up with this stuff. You see, and as you look at this, you have to ask yourself, biblically speaking, is this true? Is it true that a child cannot understand how another person feels? You know, mum is upset about something, and mum's sitting in the kitchen crying, and her little 2-year-old comes up and takes mummy's hand and said, "Mummy's sad." Well, child can't do much more than that, but child understands something about how another person feels. This is the consequence of Kohlberg's theory of moral development. You see, we're not requiring anything of our infants. We're not requiring them to say sorry. I can't remember what you told me. Most children remember only what is important to them. Now, this is cognitive development, okay? This is cognitive. One of the consequences of Piaget's theories. I can't remember what you told me. Most children remember only what's important to them. A child may not remember that you just told them to walk and not run while indoors. Adults often forget that children have trouble remembering. Is that true? Pardon?
I don't think so.
You don't think so?
No.
What do you think, Michelle?
Yeah, it depends on the child, I don't know. I know my kids have no trouble remembering some things.
Things they want to remember.
Things I remember, yeah, so I don't see why they can't remember. Yeah.
Very good. Very good. I can't focus on more than one task at a time. This is cognitive development again. Pick up your toys, put on your shoes, wash your face, we're going out to play. Why would you wash your face if you're going out to play? But anyway, this command has 3 more tasks than a young child is able to focus on. Most young children will remember the last task or the task that's most important to them. With the above command, all the children may focus on is what he or she is going out to play. That might be the one thing they pick up on. And so they rush out of the house without picking up their toys or putting on their shoes. And the parent might think this is gross disobedience and punish them severely. And cognitive development would say, now hold on, don't expect the child to focus on more than one task at a time. What do you think about that?
So what age does that stop? I know some adults are in the same category.
Multitasking is a bit of a challenge, right?
It's kind of like people want to hear what they want to hear too. But, you know, it depends how you tell them. Like if you tell them as you're moving towards the door going out, or if you actually sit down and tell them, they've got more chance of hearing it. So if you're a foolish parent, you don't do that.
So you think that a child can focus on more than one task at a time?
Yeah.
How old the child is.
Depends on how old and
Well, it was 0 to
depends on
2.
your relationship.
0 to 2.
I think you probably need to walk through it a few more times. Then you can't just give them 4 commands and expect them to do it in ABC order. And
So maybe we should take one at a time. Let's pick up our toys, and when they've done that, let's put on our shoes. When they've done that, let's go and wash our face.
Yeah,
Maybe.
By 3 though, I think. It depends too if you've done it with them before a lot of times, and then you say, okay, now I want you to do, and they know
Right.
what you're talking about, then they probably
Okay.
do it by age 3.
Okay. What does Piaget say? Physical development, objects in the environment, and social interaction. All 3 have to come together. And you just said that. Maybe you do it with them. And they child reach an equilibrium where they're cognitively
Yeah, well,
self-actualized.
they
at
understand
2.
what you're asking.
I can't understand negative commands. If a child reaches to put his or her finger on an electric wall outlet and you say don't, the child is confused because he or she doesn't know how to reverse their action. Saying pull your hand back, that's dangerous, gives the child a positive action to take. This is cognitive development again.
That's rubbish. Zeke knew what that meant when he was about 4 months or something. With the plugs and things.
Here's another one, cognitive. I can't measure. When you want a child to pour a glass of milk or juice and you hand him or her a full jug, pitcher is American. Pitcher means a jug. Expect the child to pour all the milk into the glass, even if it pours all over the floor or table. Young children do not understand that all of the milk will not fit into the glass, and so keep pouring until it's too late. This is Piaget's pure pre-operational. This is the child can't assess quantities. So there's the jug of milk, and it might be this big, and there's the glass that's only this big, and the child can't see that it's a different quantity, and so when you say, pour yourself a glass of milk, he'll just keep pouring till it's all out of the jug and all over the floor.
It might depend how you explain it. Because if you just said...
Yeah, well, I know you're driving for solutions, which is fine, but the issue here is that true? Is it true that a child can't understand negative commands? This is cognitive development. Do we have to wait till the child reaches a certain stage in its cognitive development before we can expect the child to be able to, I can't measure, to be able to pour a glass of milk without help? Motor skills is also involved here, physical development. You know how children are always spelling things? What do you do with that? Do you just accept that as part of their cognitive and physical development, or is that something which they should be disciplined for?
Well, you don't. If you're going to be really anxious about your precious carpet being spilt with milk, you don't get them to touch a big container of milk over carpet.
But you know how when they're eating a meal, they'll knock their glass over, and so you put plastic on the floor, don't you, under the table?
Mm.
So I mean, how do you deal with that? Is that something they should be disciplined for, or is that a cognitive, physical, developmental thing? Are you a developmentalist or a disciplinarian?
There's a difference between if it's accidental or if it's on purpose.
And if it's accidental, what do you do?
I think if an adult knocks the glass of milk on the table, you would still kind of pity them a little bit. You wouldn't whip them.
If your wife throws it at you, you're in trouble. But what about, we're talking about 2-year-olds, right? Or 3-year-olds sitting at the table. You know, you put a glass in front of them, you only half fill it, don't you? A little bit, you don't fill it up. See, and you watch them, and when their little elbows get a bit too close, and they're totally unaware, you just kind of move it out a little bit. Make sure they don't see you, otherwise they'll grab it.
But if they're being silly and they're obviously moving around, you say, careful, can you please sit down because your glass is right there and you're going to knock it over. And if they're silly again...
Oh, being silly. At the bottom of the page, I can't sit still for very long. Dad would say, no, you've just been silly. See, physical development. What should we be expecting?
Well, it just occurred to me, I think a lot of it, physical does come into it a lot, in that teenagers often go through an awkward stage when they have a growth spurt and they're tripping over themselves, bumping into things because they grow so much, and babies are like multiplying in size over a number of short years. And so a lot of trying to pour, trying to do things and making silly, mistakes. A lot of it would be just getting used to all their new proportion.
It's an opportunity to show grace. I think a lot of the annoyance it's actually just annoyance at the things from the part of the parent, because I have to do more work now. Or I'm embarrassed in front of all the other parents, sort of thing. It's actually, that's what's really going on. It's your own heart that's
Okay.
the problem. So it's being aware of your own heart too, I guess.
So we're wanting the child to be at a different place from where they're at. You know, when are you going to learn not to do that? That's a cognitive development statement. When are you going to learn not to do that? Well, if the child was able to tell you, he'd say, well, not yet, mummy. You just have to wait a few years. You see? And your parent will say, don't you Piaget me, kid. You just learn, exercise some discipline.
Certainly stunt the child's confidence, I think, by trying to expect them to get things right before they can. And then kids won't make mistakes anymore, but the reason they don't make them is because they actually don't even try.
They're too scared to.
Yeah, they're afraid.
But if you do know they can, such as the bottom ones sitting still for, that they can sit still and eat their breakfast because they like eating, and they're just, because that they've got a new toy, they keep on getting distracted by it. You sort of say, well, if you can't sit still, I'm going to take this toy away, or something. So there's being able to know what their level is and relating it to that.
Well, you sound like a developmentalist now, knowing what their level is.
But their level is not what someone else says is standard for.
Right.
I think like I get my 9-month-old daughter to sit still and eat her breakfast, and it's a lot earlier. I mean, I strap her into it. But still.
Those little straight jackets for kids, they're great, aren't they?
But still, there's a certain expectation, and if she starts
Okay.
making food, then that's it. Food.
So now you said they like to eat, so they'll sit still while they eat. So does that mean that when they stop eating, we shouldn't expect them to sit still because they want to get down from the table and play?
Depends on the circumstances. Like sometimes, like for my 9-month-old, I'm not going to keep on feeding her if she's not hungry anymore. So okay, down no more.
Okay. So the child's finished eating, her little tummy's all filled up, she wants to go away and play, but Daddy wants her to sit still a bit longer while he reads the Bible because it's family worship time. And the child is saying, I can't sit still for very long. Young children are often told to sit still while their bodies are telling them to move. When the large muscles in a preschooler's arms and legs are growing rapidly, they cry out for exercise, and preschoolers feel the need to move around.
So I think it's for the parent to sort of see what's feasible. I think for my 9-month-old, she's sat for 10 minutes eating a dinner, and then to get her to sit for another 10 minutes while I read the Bible is unreasonable. But if she's been playing for a while, and I come and give her a cuddle and get Micah to sit next to me, and we do a very short reading.
Okay, so what you've done is you've modified your approach to take account of the fact that they're at a developmental stage where they can't sit still for long. In other words, you are aware of physical development and probably cognitive development as to their attention span, and you're allowing for that.
What's that whole of children obey their parents but don't exasperate others? Don't exasperate them. It's kind of that thing comes into it too, doesn't it?
So if you have a family with an age range, here's an age range here, for instance, say all 3 of your boys are sitting at the table, and would you have different expectations of the 7-year-old from the 2-year-old?
Yeah.
Based on this kind of what we're talking about here, development.
I guess so. Yeah. Although, mostly because of the personality of the 2-year-old more than
Right.
the age stage. But yeah, I mean, understanding of what we're talking about when we're doing Bible reading, definitely. One doesn't really understand.
Right. Right.
The Cobbler was saying, don't have any expectation for someone on the street.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's what this bloke is saying too. Oops. In this handout. That's what he's saying. And what about this? I can't tell you the truth when you set me up. If you see a child do something inappropriate and you ask if he or she has done it, the child will probably deny it. Because their little hearts are sinful. Colbeck said, no. They'll deny it because they have no moral awareness until they're 3 years of age. Don't ask the child if you know what happened, it only sets them up for failure. So you walk into the room, right, and the 3-year-old is sitting there looking very shamefaced, and his 80-month-old sister is crying her eyes out, and you know something bad's gone down. You only be in the room a nanosecond, and come back in, and it's all turned to custard. So you say to your 3-year-old, what's going on? What happened? I don't know. Now Kohlberg would say the question is inappropriate. In other words, whatever goes on, there's no way you can find out because there's no moral development. So don't even ask the question. Just get on with life. And later, when they're about 5, you can ask the question and expect an answer. Did Kohlberg ever have children? Over the page.
It's interesting when they're about 2 years old, they tend to be, well, Mike was more honest. He would say what happened. And when he gets to 3, he realises there's going to be a punishment.
Honesty's not always the best policy.
Cover it up a bit. So we just, if he's lying, we would say, is that really what happened? And if he denies it again, we'll say, well, how about, why is there a bit of milk on your shirt? Or, he's like, well, okay, he'll actually fess up. But it's teaching him, there's more and more that he will confess earlier on. And you say, well, actually, I'm sorry.
And see, isn't that fascinating, Mark, that, up until 3, there's so much you can teach them morally. There is so much. There's just heaps and heaps. Because their little hearts are just, they never stop. They never stop making moral decisions. It's a lot of fun, isn't it? I can't play with other children until I'm ready. Now this is social development theories. Children go through different stages of social interaction. If they're allowed to grow at their own pace, they will begin to interact with other children when they're ready. We all know you go into a preschool, there's always the infants that, want to play by themselves, and those that are more socially engaged. Now, if we're into social development theory, we're probably going to make judgments and assumptions about the children that are actively socially engaged and those that aren't. Well, if a child's grown up as an only child and he's grown up with a bunch of other kids in the family, that's, at what stage? You see what happens? This becomes like a cookie cutter. And you just lay it on every child, and it becomes a mechanistic response to every child's operation. And whereas, a child's social development is dependent on its environment more than it is upon what drives its social development in terms of life stage. Well, what about I can't wait? Well, here's one. I don't understand right and wrong. That's moral development, cognitive. Because young children don't understand cause and effect relationships, they can't fully understand right and wrong. A young child does not understand intentional versus unintentional actions, can only see issues from his or her own perspective and views issues as black and white. In your experience with your children, were they able to understand the difference between right and wrong before the age of 3?
Yes.
And I expect you'll be saying yes in a year or so's time.
He's saying this now.
They're saying yes now at 14 months.
Yeah, but even if, like, some of these are true, that child can't understand when it says sorry and stuff, isn't it still, you can still teach them to say, I'm sorry, and they might not fully understand it, but it won't be a foreign concept when they can grow in their understanding of it, or they can learn things like how to support. And you might have to explain it, but
So you introduce the concept, and they grow into their understanding of it.
and not expect them to get it straight
Right.
away. But if you don't introduce it till they're 3 or 5, then it'll be strange to them.
Yes. And they may be more resistant to taking it on board at 3 or 5.
Mm.
That's a very good point. Introduce the concepts earlier, even though they may not be able to grasp it fully. See, we're going to find with Piaget, for instance, he would say that cognitive development, children don't understand abstract concepts until they're 7 years of age. Therefore, don't bother teaching them about God until they get to 7. Because God's an abstract construct to Piaget. But you see, you introduce the idea of God from day one. You read them little Bible stories. You see, and they're going to grow in their understanding and awareness of God because you introduced it.
Well, it's relational too, because if you do everything else trustworthily, sort of in their life, and do what you say you will and all that, then they'll actually trust all the moral things you're teaching them, as in you're telling the truth and all that. So
Okay.
I think that's a big part of it. If they don't trust you because you're not consistent with feeding them and all that, then probably they wouldn't trust you either when you tell them moral things.
Tell them about God. Okay? Very good. What your children can't do yet. Just coming back to the lecture notes, Kohlberg left unanswered the moral issues pertaining to children younger than 3. But did he? Did he, in fact? By not making any judgment of these younger children, did he not, by implication, strongly suggest that children below the age of 3 cannot be trained and punished for their moral choices? Some of these questions we've already answered here tonight. Can a child develop morally before the age of 3? And you've all agreed that they can. What do the scriptures require of the parents of infants? Now we're talking infants as 0 to 2. What do the scriptures require of parents of children of that age?
In the Old Testament there was circumcision. And then that was a sign that they became part of the covenant
Okay.
family, where they followed God's law and God's rules.
Okay, so to answer our question, what does God require of parents of that children that age in that light, in light of that?
To follow God along with family.
Maybe you include them in your...
Well, just picking up on that circumcision issue, one thing they're required to do is to bring those children, infant children, into the church from an early age, and to see them as part of God's family, and to raise them accordingly. Is that right? You're a good Presbyterian, aren't you?
Not a good one, but yeah.
Join the club. Hans is not a...
You include them in what you do, sort of culture. Like, you don't leave them at home and go and do your religion.
Okay, so the Lord requires us to see them as belonging to His family. Okay, what else do the scriptures require of parents of infants?
Train them. It's the same as any child.
Okay, well that's important.
Babies and teenagers.
So you're saying then that training begins here, not up here. In other words, we don't have to wait for the age stage to kick in. Now the training will differ as we go along, but it does have to start back here. Okay, so Michelle, just unpacking that a bit more then, thinking biblically, in what areas, 0 to 2, can we expect to train our children in? What sort of things?
I think it's important for them to understand that actions have a consequence. So they learn from, really little that if they drop their dinner off the high chair, that they might get, a smack or
Okay,
not get their dinner or
Okay.
something. So there's a consequence.
okay,
And it starts off small so that they learn that as they get older they start making the right choices along with God's standards that you hope as a parent set out for them.
So in other words, it's a very proactive involvement you have with the infant in training them. It's not a hands-off approach until they get old enough.
No.
You're involved with them from day one, really. Do we demand feed or schedule feed? Well, if you schedule feed, then right from day one you're training the child not to expect instant gratification. So you make those decisions. And, okay, what else? What else should we, do the scriptures require of us as parents? To see them as part of God's family, yes. To train them as consequences for actions.
The talk, like Deuteronomy 6, where, when you lie down, when you get up, when you walk down the road,
Yes.
you teach them about God. So you live life in reference to God.
Okay.
Right through life, not just church sort of.
Okay.
So yeah, they're included in it. So even if it's over their head or whatever, they're still part of it. They're there.
Okay.
They're observing you.
Okay, that's their environment.
They're observing you and your environment, and I think that's a big part of it. You model.
Okay.
You expect them to come to be like
Very good.
like controlling your own emotional reactions and things. Well, they'll have to start learning to do that. So if they see you doing that, not if you always blow your top or
Okay.
hit people or whatever, then it'd be pretty hard to get them not to.
So the scriptures require us to create a godly environment for our infants to grow in, where they feel safe, where they feel protected, where they feel cared for. Godly environment. Another thing the scriptures require of our infants is that we love them with a love that reflects God's love. Ephesians 5:1, imitate God to one another in the way we love. So we love our children in spite of their sinfulness, in spite of their disobedience, in spite of their mistakes. We love them in spite of their, wherever they are on the development of the lifespan. And we love them unconditionally. Our love doesn't wax and wane depending on their behaviour. So it was one thing to say that it was a naughty thing to do to pull your sister's hair. It's another thing to say, you are a naughty boy. The second one is making a judgment about them as a person. Well, God doesn't do that with us. He disciplines us for our actions, but his statement about us as people is always one of full of grace and mercy and acceptance and forgiveness and love. And that's how we're to love our children.
I think God, yes, he gives us rules, but it's not all about rules. I think he ultimately wants us to have that love that he has. So it's, often we can get old Colbert a little focused on that. We're trying to push a moral standard onto them. I think it's more than that. Yes, when they're young, there will be a lot of rules, but ultimately, we're trying to shape their worldview so that they're not their own little kings in the world. That there is other people in that world, and there's ultimately God in that world. So it's a training, but it's more than just training them to comply to moral standards. It's a training to shape their whole thinking, so that when they get to that later in life, teenage or older, they're thinking more than rules. They're thinking how God would.
Okay, very good. So the rules are a mean to an end. That's a very important point, because you see, with children we tend to raise them according to rules, and when they grow up we expect them to live according to grace. We teach them to, we train them to be legalists and then try to teach them about grace when they're older. So much of it, we can't be without rules, so much of it depends on our attitude to the rules that we have in the home and we have with the children. That these rules are designed exactly what Mark said, to train them in understanding what a godly life looks like. But you see, it's our attitude to the enforcing of the rules, it's our attitude to the breaking of the rules. It's what do we do when the rules have been broken or the rules are no longer effective. You see, in other words, if in our attitude we make it all about the rules and not about the child's heart, then we're training the child to be a legalist. We're training them to live their life according to the rules. And when they're older, we want them to respond to a God of grace, and they're saying, well, you've trained me to believe in a God of rules. So our attitude to the rules is absolutely imperative, that we see the rules as a guide to the children's behaviour, rather than seeing the rules as the standard by which I will relate to my child. So rather than relating to them on the basis of rules, you relate to them on the basis of love. The rules are there as a guide to modify their behaviour.
Benna had an interesting table. They talked about the three kinds of sort of disciplines that they observed in all these families and that. And they had authoritative, and permissive, I think it was. And just, it had a chart in it. One of the things was interesting was the amount of relating that went on, communication, I think. And so permissive, and it was parent to child and child to parent, and parent to child, and the permissive was actually low. In other words, it's kind of easy parenting. You don't actually invest much, and there's a lot of high child to parent, so they're talking back a lot and telling you what they want and all that, and they didn't come out very happy. And then the authoritarian was actually the reverse, high parent to child. So it's all sort of one way, but very little coming back. You're not allowing to hear back. And then the authoritative, which come out with the best results, as in well-adjusted people who could socially relate and follow rules, but also be free. It was high on both counts. So it was high amount of communication going down and coming up. And it was just made me that, wow, parenting really is just about a really high level of communication constantly. Like, there's no turning off, just because you're tired or whatever. Like, if they need it, they need it. Like, doesn't necessarily make
Very
me
good.
happy, but yeah, quite powerful.
As we go along here, we're going to find that there's two questions that children want answered. Am I loved? The other one is, can I have my own way? Those are the two questions from infancy onwards that children want to have answered by their parents. Am I loved, and can I have my own way? Now, what are the options? Yes, yes, no, no, yes, no, no, yes. And we don't always get it right. But ultimately, we want to be able to give them a yes-no answer to those two questions. Now, whether we can say no to the second one and yet convince them of a yes to the first one ultimately comes down to how we treat the rules in our home. The rules are not a criteria for number one. Now this is, actually these two questions are in play from infancy all the way through to adolescence.
Well, the heart is what determines their heart. It's kind of determining what way, we're trying to shape them so that their way is actually God's way. It's not, so if, can I have my own way, if your way is God's way, yes you can. But it's not God's way, no you can't. So it's not
Okay.
yes or no in that, that's the way. What's the way
Well,
to go?
Yeah, When you have a 2-year-old, this becomes a pretty important question. Okay, what do scriptures require of parents? Can a young child be punished for, say, displays of anger? Or disciplined for displays of anger? This is 0 to 2, remember?
God says it's not wrong to be angry. He does say it's wrong to smash things and to not listen to your parents and to cause destruction. So often it's those displays of anger that usually they're angry because their expectations aren't met and they're not getting their own way. So they ask that question, can I have my own way? And you said to them no, and their response is anger.
Okay. And so now what can we do about that anger? Do we just shrug our shoulders and wait for later stage in age development where cognitively they can reason it through and not be angry?
I think you definitely don't change it to a yes, because that's some parents in a supermarket or something would be pressurised by that tantrum and suddenly can I have my own way? Oh, if you're going to do that, then I'll make it a yes, so you can be quiet now.
All right. So in an ideal situation, what should we do about that anger? Should we just ignore it, or should we try to deal with it in some way? Is it just a childish tantrum, or is it a little sinful heart in full display?
I think you need to kind of step back and think, well, is my child frustrated because he doesn't understand what I want? It's the whole thing. Because maybe I'm not good at making it clear what he needs to do or what I want from him before I make a judgment on his behaviour. So there's that sort of in-between step.
So in other words, Andrew, what you could do is you can make a cognitive inventory of all these and just ask yourself, what's this little inner drives telling him? Is this to do with social development? Is this to do with cognitive development, moral development, physical development? And then spiritual development. So the way of grace would be to see if the anger is to do with his environment or to do with me, and to remove all those constraints. And then anger ultimately comes from the heart. It doesn't originate outside of us. Things outside of us can trigger our anger, but Jesus said our anger comes from our heart, not from outside of us. So it's not true that your kids make you angry. They just trigger the anger that's already there. You see? And so with a child that's angry, ultimately it's a spiritual issue, because Jesus said anger comes from the heart. So at some point you could talk to him about what's going on in his or her heart, and even with an infant you can do that. Ask them what they're feeling.
And the Bible does say as parents that we're not to provoke our children, and even though I think if you look at it from a legalistic point of view, we've been quite fair. We've said no, you can't have that. But there's actually ways that you can wisely deal with your child that you know that they're less likely to be angry. Like for instance, with my son, when he's tired, he tends to have these, he's not so happy when things change to how he's planned them. So one way I deal with it is to, at the beginning, say, well, this is what's going to happen. You're going to, when you're finished watching this or playing with this, then you're going to do this. You're going to put your pajamas on, then you're going to do this, and then you're going to do this. So it's, even while he's playing that game or watching TV or whatever it is, it's saying, well, after you've finished that, when that finishes, you're not going to have another one. You're going to then do this and that, and then that actually almost prevents him from.
So you make it very clear.
Make it very clear.
Very definite.
Because if you suddenly say, well, in your mind you've said, oh, when he's finished, then it's going to stop. For him, it's like it's a sudden stop, and he's thinking, I just want to have another one, and he just totally breaks down into a tantrum.
He wasn't prepared for that.
He wasn't prepared.
Okay, very good.
So that even though scripturally we have a right as parents to tell our children what they're going to do next.
So by preparing them for that, you're basically training them to obey you by using that approach.
Well, it says God remembers we're dust, and as adults we're dust, so we're weak and frail and given to temptation. So we need to do that with our kids too. Like when Zeke is tired, there's no point trying to get him to do something that you're going to do in the morning, like 5 o'clock, 6 and out at night. It's just not going to happen.
That's the acid hour.
Yeah. So yeah, it's just sort of being understanding.
Can an infant child be taught to be other than egocentric? In other words, can they be taught to take account of the needs of others?
I'm not so sure about that one.
Now the social development theorists would say that egocentricity is not a bad word. It's just a natural age stage that the child goes through, and when he's through that stage, then he can be helped to consider the needs of others.
I think that it's less understanding than an older child, but it's still an understanding. Like I've seen a young child of 1 become jealous because their parents have held a younger child, and they've actually done something, potentially even gone and pulled the person's hair because they're jealous of that kid. So it's a predetermined punishment almost of that kid because it's not happening how they want it to. So I think they still, in that situation, they know deep down that that's not right.
Okay. The very term egocentric, remember Freud and his inner drives, he had the ego and the id and the super id. Egocentric is totally Freudian. It's saying the child is egocentric. They have inner drives which are orientated towards self. Inner drives to satisfy the innate desires and needs and passions of a small child. and you know, as you bring the expectations of society to bear on those needs, it causes conflict at the level of the ego, because the ego is fighting to have those inner drives expressed. Remember our diagram, our Freudian diagram? So you see that's exactly what's going on, Freud would say, in the 2-year-old egocentric child. Inner drives, and it's good. They would say you have to wait until there's a cognitive development and a social development for them to be able to reach that point where they have an equilibrium with their environment and they have learnt to control those desires. But don't expect it to happen early or soon. So you don't take your 2-year-old to the supermarket, see, because if they have a tantrum, well, that's just what 2-year-olds do. There's nothing you can do about it. It's a given. Well, can they be taught to be other than egocentric?
Well, I was looking at that before. I can't share. And like our boy, he loves his food. Like, it's just when he's hungry, but he'll still give it to you. Like, and if you take it and eat it, he doesn't flip out. And then there's other days when he offers it to you and then he pulls it back and he starts to laugh. It's a joke. He's like, that was when he was only 5 or 6 months old, and it's like but he's also hungry. He's eating, you know, and it's like, man, there's other stuff going on, you know. He knows how to share. I'm not saying he's always going to share or want to share, but he actually wants to, he knows it's time to eat and he's giving you something to eat. Like,
isn't that neat?
Yeah.
Isn't that lovely?
Yeah. So yeah, these are very fluid, I think.
Should a baby be demand fed or schedule fed? Okay, mothers, what did you decide to do? Mark, what did your children's mother decide to do in that regard?
It was actually different per child.
One was demand and one was schedule?
Kind of. I mean, in that it was making sure they had their need. So, I mean, for Micah, we could actually tell when his cries. So we could actually tell when he was just playing us and when he was hungry. And he was also born a month early, and so he was actually needing more milk than I say when I was born on time. So and they say also that for prem babies they tend to have more growth spurts. So at a growth spurt, there's when they get hungrier and then they do. It's almost like they're catching up and they're wanting to.
Right.
To be so for Michael, we tended to demand feed him, but we actually were almost sensitive to his cry, so we knew up to about when he was 4 months old, we knew when he was hungry and we knew when he was playing him. So we'd actually put him out in his cot sometimes and let him cry for half an hour. But we wouldn't, but when he was hungry, which was often every 2 hours at first, or even every 2.5 hours, or every 3 hours, which was a lot more frequent with Kira. It was almost like it was demand feeding, but it was not quite every time he cried we gave him a feed.
So you could tell a hungry cry from another kind of cry.
So
Okay, and so you'd feed him in response to the hungry cry, but not the other kind of cries.
Mm-hmm.
Now, see, these guys would say, you know, you shouldn't schedule feed, you see? You should demand feed. In other words, you're there to meet their needs, and don't assume anything, don't make any moral assumptions about them before age of 3. You know, whatever it does to just keep them happy and keep their physical development going. Michelle, what did you guys do?
We decided that mostly for us, since ego's is selfish, but for our own sake, because we, personally, I'm very ordered and function. Don't function very well under sort of became also like a distraction once we did it. And we've done some research and found that most healthy children do well in schedule feed because they sleep better at night and things like that.
Okay. And
I don't know if this is just always the right way.
right. So there's not a right and wrong here. It's just often what the theorists will tell us. If you schedule feed a child, then you are training them, really from the beginning. You're training them to be other than egocentric. If you demand feed, then you're feeding right into their inner drives.
It depends if you're feeding what they need. Because I know someone who schedule fed their baby, and they go, well, the book says that they can have 6 hours between feeds. And I think what happened is that kid learned that if they cried, it was no use. So they just learned to be silent. And by the time they were 1, they were actually 10th percentile. They were like way underweight. They were basically starving their child. So there's a balance. There's yes, it's you setting the schedule, but you have to be very sensitive to the needs of that child. You can't say, well, the book says they can sleep through the night, so they're going to sleep through the night because I want my sleep. You're actually being selfish yourself, and you're not actually loving your child like you should.
Okay, very good. Would you schedule feed or demand feed your baby?
Mostly schedule, but because he's first and was flexible, like he wasn't rigid about it because our schedule changes and his, there's always things to set it up, like he had growth spurts and teething and blah blah blah. But I think when you have more kids, you need to, like my mom had more of a schedule, but you need to when you
have more children.
Yeah.
Yeah, we found you could go to the 3 hours because we followed this baby wise thing, and there's a lot of people dissing it, saying it's horrible. But actually, if you actually read it and hear what he's saying follow this as much as you can, but you have to play with it a bit, and that's what we did. But we could make Zeke do 3 hours a day, which was nice for all our activities. But then we found that he wouldn't get through the whole night. So if he'd cry at 2.5, we'll just feed him half an hour early a couple of times, and then he'll sleep 8-9 hours fairly quick. So it was kind of just working it out.
Should a baby be left to cry for the purpose of simply attention getting? Mark, you seem to suggest that no, you wouldn't. Sorry, yes, you would.
Yes, you would. But
Yes, you would.
With both Pierre and Michael, we understood their painful cry because they were both had reflux.
So if it was simply attention getting, then you would leave them.
Yep. But often we could hear that they were actually in pain. We picked them up, we burped them. The farts would come out, the burps would come out. There was obviously wind in their stomach that was causing them pain.
Right.
And we put them down and they'd just sleep. So it was kind of, we learned what their cry was and we found out it was actually true. And yet,
Okay.
if it wasn't, if they were just, we could tell their cry when they were just having us on and being annoying.
You see, you're making moral assumptions and moral judgments about your baby's cries. See, Kohlberg would be horrified. He'd say, you can't do that till the age 3. You should just, give them what they want. That's right. Make little monsters out of them.
But then there's also...
So, what about you others there? Would you leave your baby to cry if the purpose was simply attention getting?
Depends what time of day it is. Like, I don't think attention's wrong. Like, if sometimes they're happy if you play with them or hold them. But in the middle of the night, maybe they need to learn that they need to sleep, so...
You're training them. You're training them. Learning. I heard that word learn. See, you're training them.
Because I think it's not wrong. I mean, I want Eden to give me attention sometimes, so I'll
So you'll
make
cry.
it obvious.
You'll cry.
Well, I have my ways of crying. But is that a wrong desire for a kid to want attention from his parents? I don't necessarily think so. But it needs to be appropriate. So yeah, at night it's got to learn. But other times, if I'm free
You'd be a
to...
better parent to get sleep.
yeah, at night you want to train them out of it, but at other times it's like my kid actually wants to spend time with me, so, and I'm available, so why not?
So you see what you guys are doing? You're all making value judgments about your 0 to 2 year olds. You're all making value, you're flying right on the face of all these theorists. And you're making value judgments. Isn't it wonderful? And you see, in Christ, this is the freedom we have. To deal with our children according to their individuality, turning to the value judgments, the wisdom that Christ gives us with our children, knowing that they're His children. This is great stuff. Kohlberg would say there was no way to answer these questions before the age of 3. All those questions there. Because the child does not have the cognitive, social, or moral development to understand and comply with what a caregiver may require of them. Is he right? Well, I think what we can say about Kohlberg is that his observations were very accurate. The theories he developed on the basis of his observations led him astray. He theorized on the basis of his observations. He made value judgments about children based on what he observed. In other words, he was able to explain what he saw, but he wasn't able to understand what he saw. And the theory is his attempt to give understanding to his observation, his data of observation. Now, all of us are observing all the time, our children and other people. All these theorists are observing. And when they seek to understand what they're observing, that's what a theory is. And if they do that without the scriptures, then every time they're going to miss it.
It's like, it's kind of like with personality theory, the same whole idea, really, isn't it? It's all based on observations, which describes what happens, but it doesn't necessarily explain it.
Doesn't explain it, doesn't understand it, that's right. So a parent with the Bible in one hand and a baby in the other is better than any particular theorist. Now, so why are we doing all this stuff? Well, you're going to meet it in the literature, and you're also going to meet it in the people that you end up counselling with. And you're going to meet it with people who, see, all this stuff is out there, like that article from the New Zealand Herald I showed you. All that's out there. It's in the popular environment of our culture. And so people are going to front up to you and they're going to say, well, look, my child's not walking, on the percentile, and what does that say down here? And I can't decide whether to demand feed or schedule feed, and it's just keeping awake at night, but all the books I read say I should demand feed, and as Christian parents, they don't know what to do. And along comes the anti-smacking bill, and what should a Christian parent do when it comes to disciplining their child? Well, these are often counselling issues, which you're going to be involved in. And it's not enough simply to counsel someone out of your own life experience. That's going to always be a part of it. But to have an understanding of some of this age stage stuff gives you the opportunity to talk to them in terms of the voices that they're hearing, the voices that are coming in on them. You can speak to them about those voices and what to do, how to deal with those voices, how to respond to those voices, and how to chart their own course before God with their children. Okay? My word, look at that. Next week, early childhood, 2 to 6. Keep reading Kohlberg. And we've just got one lecture on early childhood. 2 to 6. Okay? Thanks, guys. You've been very good. Let me pray for you. Father God, as we've transversed some of these issues and considered some of these questions and some of these theories, it's once again we've found that the wisdom of the Scriptures to far surpass the wisdom of man. We thank you, Father, that that you in your grace have provided us with this wisdom in the Scriptures and the Holy Spirit in our heart through the Scriptures giving us wisdom and insight. And Lord, we are aware that there is so much misunderstanding about how to raise children from an early age, and many even Christian parents are confused at what to do and how to go about it, and particularly new parents. And Father, we pray that as we reflect on our own our own parenting, and we reflect on where where we can put foolishness to one side, grow in a wisdom and understanding of our own hearts and the hearts of our children, that we'd be better able to bring encouragement and guidance and blessing to the hearts of others. We thank you for the children you've given us, and we thank you that they're gifts from your heart to our heart, and that you love them, and you desire for us to love them and to train them, and that they might grow up to be boys and girls who love the Lord Jesus. We thank you for this enormous privilege that's ours. In Christ's name, amen.